Hello and welcome. My name is Moritz. I work with coinIX, an investment firm focused on blockchain and crypto-related issues. And I have the pleasure of sitting here with Patrick. Patrick is one of the founders of a company called Ampli. And as some of you may have seen, coinIX recently made a small investment into Ampli, which is a young startup. And it's a great pleasure to learn a little bit more about what Ampli does. And before we dive into it, maybe can you give me a brief background? What was your journey until you ended up doing crypto, blockchain, and eventually something which is agentic AI, which is one of the kind of buzzwords of today?
Totally. First of all, thank you for having me, Moritz. So my name is Patrick Delaney. I'm Ampli's CEO and one of the co-founders. And originally, before finding my way to blockchain and finance, I was working as a political scientist. I studied political science here in Hamburg, together with philosophy and law. And I worked in academia for a couple of years and in the German development corporation field before finding my way to Ethereum and blockchain in 2016. And as a political scientist who was working in governance and alternative economics, I was fascinated by the idea of smart contracts and programmable money, so to say. And I really got deep into the weeds in terms of what could this mean for human coordination and for the flow of capital and creating incentives to build a more interesting future. Over the years, I started working more deeply in the blockchain space, and I started consulting and advising different projects, L1s, DeFi protocols, etc. I was also a very, very early adopter of DeFi, decentralized finance in general, where during the very, very early days, the tokens didn't even exist yet, and the only way to actually accrue these tokens was to participate on these protocols and to contribute your money, and it was called farming at the time. So I was like super early on that as well. I did everything manually, and I also made a couple mistakes because blockchain and crypto are a scary space. You can definitely fall into traps or just like have a certain technological misunderstanding. And that was also why I was super fascinated when I saw the first AI agents in action handling digital assets. Because I immediately realized, wow, if this agent can do it, then I don't have to do it. I can just talk to it in plain English, and it can translate into machine language.
At what point in time did that start? Because there was a while where people were just using AI to kind of read text and so on. Who was the first mover in saying, let us try if AI can handle digital assets and manage digital assets?
Yeah, so I would say that for the general public, the big spillover moment was when OpenClaw hit the scene earlier this year. But in decentralized finance and in blockchain and crypto, it actually happened pretty much a year earlier with a couple companies that were pioneering AI agents that would take stablecoin positions and then allocate them to different lending markets in decentralized finance and try to optimize the yield and also risk manage these positions. One of the companies was called Giza at the time, and I was lucky enough to work with them very early on. So that was why I had like front row seats to these agents in development. And then there was also another company called Wayfinder, who are linked to a very notorious gaming project in blockchain called Parallel, who had been experimenting with AI agents in gaming for a long time.
Oh, right, okay.
And they actually made a similar transition where they were saying, hey, couldn't we use these agents that we built for our simulations to interact with each other and trade with each other and just have them, give them to a user, and then they were building, I would say, the first DeFi co-pilots where you can talk to the agents and you can tell them, hey, take my Ethereum and swap it for USDC and then put it in this market, and the agent would then do that. But not so autonomous.
I mean, to some extent, the funny thing is that more and more we see AI being used in traditional finance. However, in most of these cases, the AI will just be able to give recommendations.
Yes.
Because ultimately, at least for private investor, I don't think it will be possible to have an AI agent automatically do transactions on your Deutsche Bank account
Absolutely, because it's missing the programmability, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And therefore, digital assets are pretty much ideal for artificial intelligence to not only do recommendations but do the transactions themselves, which of course is at a risk. Before we dig into this in more detail, maybe to put things in order. Everything started with Bitcoin as a store of value, and then more and more as a volatile investment vehicle. And then there were a bunch of altcoins which were highly volatile as well. And then stable coins came to the market, which is a tokenized financial instrument that is by definition not volatile. So the good thing is you don't have this volatility. However, for an investor, you always look for yield. And then more and more it became possible to use stable coins in order to generate yield in lending protocols, sometimes in staking. But lending for the time being is, from your perspective, kind of the most popular and the standard way where you get yield on that.
Indeed, yeah.
And I think a little bit similar to what we see in the traditional markets where money is seeking yield, and you have a bunch of platforms on the internet where you can have the kind of the best rate between different banks. You more and more see similar kind of different providers offerings where you can get the best yield on the market. And I think if you want to improve this, because everything is on chain, all data is entirely transparent, it makes sense to use AI in order to find out which is the optimal allocation. However, this is evolving. But what exactly is the role of Ampli in all this?
So as you mentioned, the capabilities of the AI agents, they actually line up very, very well with the surface area and the environment that we find on blockchain and in decentralized finance. They can process a lot of data in parallel. They very, very easily are able to construct the right commands to execute something that then settles on chain. For example, the movement of a stable coin and depositing that into a lending market where somebody would pay an interest for your deposited dollars or euros. What the core problem is, in my opinion, though, is trust. And again, blockchain, actually the whole story of Bitcoin is also a story about trust. And that is a very, very lucky circumstance for us now, because now we are facing the question of how can we trust an AI agent with my money or with the assets that I hold. And it's actually a difficult question to answer. I would even go so far to say that you should not trust an AI agent with your money. You do want to harvest and benefit from all these capabilities, though. And the way to do that, this is where Ampli comes in, is where we do something where we call it the separation of powers. We make sure that the agent only ever takes care of the intelligence and only makes suggestion to a system that you solely control. You always keep the keys to your assets. The agent never holds any keys, nor would a company that built the agent for you that you're renting it from, for example. But you manage the keys in a very, very sophisticated system, and you write a rule book, which we call a policy engine, to make sure that only transactions that are within the scope of the rules that you set will ever execute. And the agent just sends suggestions to your system that then always need to pass through that rulebook.
So, to some extent, if we want to compare the value proposition of Ampli with the traditional finance system, one might think about two parts being an asset management and a risk management. And we have a 4I principle where in most kind of asset management firms you need to have a separate risk management function, which essentially provides security that the asset manager does not exceed certain limits and does not do what he feels is appropriate, but remains within a predetermined set of borders or limits. And having a separate function, which is not part of the agent, is pretty much what we have seen for centuries in the traditional markets. And of course, if you want to have not human asset managers, but artificial intelligence, you need to have the kind of proper risk manager to be able to handle or to liaise with these AI agents.
And also, we do firmly believe that the human asset manager is not going to be replaced by an AI. His capabilities are only going to be leveraged by that AI. So the question we had to answer was, how can we keep the human in the loop in a scenario like that? And one answer would be, well, the agent makes suggestions and you approve them manually. And for certain systems that might be useful and possible. But if you're looking at finance, then I believe that you would forego a lot of the benefits that you get from AI. And it is really the real-timeness of it all, right? Like, you want the AI to be able to act autonomously, but you also want to set the boundaries in which that can happen.
So your system, how would one understand the boundaries and the limit? What would be an example of a setup for an investor to say, okay, let the agents do what they want, but not get above what kind of?
So first of all, you would start by creating, I would say, the overarching fences around your system, where you make sure that the money can only ever flow to addresses and protocols that you approved. And that would be, for example, your liquidation address, where you go back to your bank account back into the traditional euro or dollar system, or it would be certain protocols and markets that you already approved, where you know, okay, the agent is allowed to go there. And then from there on, you get more granular. You can tell, you can set, for example, caps of so-called utilization rates. This plays a role in something that's called vaults in decentralized finance, where you actually have like curated pools of money, where an asset manager created a strategy and the money is allocated to different financial products, and the utilization rate plays a role in terms of how quickly you can get out of these instruments if something happens. And that's where you might want to set it in a way that you're not in that area where it could be difficult to get back out again. Because again, you want to to use the agent because it can very, very quickly react. If it puts itself into a corner that then it can't get out of, then that would really forego what you want to achieve with the agent. And then you have other operations that you could do with agents too, where the policies would look very, very different. For example, you could have an agent manage a so-called carry trade, where the agent would seek spot exposure to an asset and then short the asset on a futures market and collect funding rate, which is like a different yield-bearing product. In that case, you would want to specify the markets, the assets, the maximum slippage that the agent would accept to get its entry and its way out, and stuff like that.
Okay. Amongst the most popular kind of issues to have the risk in line is in traditional markets diversification, and you address that by issuer limits or whatever. Is there something similar in the crypto or market?
Totally. So first of all, an agent can manage a very diverse portfolio. It can be mainly in stables or purely in stables, but even then you have different flavors of stablecoins out there. And generally speaking, if you stick to the bigger issuers, the risks associated with it are very low because they're usually fully backed with a mix of T-bills and hard dollars. And but even there, you might want to diversify between different stablecoins, and the agent can programmatically help you do that. And then in terms of where you get your yield, that's also where, in my opinion, an agent can help you find a very diversified risk profile, where you might get very outsized returns on a risky yield source, where you are exposed to, let's say, collateral on the other side that is, you're lending against, that are less stable or less prime.
Yeah.
But maybe 10% of your allocation in that, managed by an agent, that could very quickly unwind these positions if one of the collateral starts behaving out of balance. That is acceptable risk. Like, that's something that you can structure with these products.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, Ampli is providing the infrastructure in which a agentic AI can do the asset allocation. How many agentic AIs for this particular task are there, and do you do a kind of due diligence on them? Is there a short list of kind of requirements, or how do you kind of pick the agents that are able or permitted to work within your infrastructure?
So currently, first of all, we focused on that yield management and risk management on stablecoin position use case, because it was the one that was most deeply explored by these early agent teams and companies building them. And then our curation process was like using them as power users very heavily, getting to know the teams personally. I very deeply believe that you need to look somebody in the eye and ask them how, what their approach to risk is. And then there's obviously the deeper technical integration process that we have between both systems then, where to some extent we have like a standardization of how we can consume the intelligence, but then also obviously every team handles certain things different call data, different API keys. So that's also where we dig very deep into what is the agent actually doing. And then we simulate internally, pretty much that. But in the future, we have plans to democratize that process more. And in future products that I have in mind that wouldn't be as institutional facing as what we are doing right now, I can also see pretty much users coming up with intelligence and then surfacing that to a smaller group of users and then graduating until they finally are available on the marketplace as well. But there are certain technological steps or issues that you need to figure out first, like where do you host that intelligence, etc. And where we're talking to partners on that front as well, because privacy becomes an issue.
Yeah. So who would be your typical client, or whom are you developing this infrastructure for?
So I believe that in the future, the asset manager that still does everything manually is going to be an exception, and maybe a megalomaniac. I'm not sure. And I think it's mostly going to be asset managers managing agents that manage assets. And right now, our first wedge or target client audience is fund managers and liquid fund managers that are already active in digital assets. And the reason why we are focusing on this group first is that with decentralized finance, we are already maybe not on the bleeding edge anymore, but it's still very innovative, and the whole adoption process is still ongoing. It's seeing like great waves of adoption recently, but still there are certain, like I would say, risk perceptions around that already. And then you have agents and this idea of handling money to an agent. And that again is something where when OpenClaw came out, finally people realized, okay, this is going to happen sooner than I might have thought, but still, how do I even do that? So in our case, we wanted to only focus on that question. How can I handle the keys to my money to an agent? And well, our answer, as I said, was you don't. But you are able to consume its intelligence, and that's why the fund managers are our first target audience. But in the future, agents allow us to supercharge the economies of float. Like any idle balance in any system can be made fruitful and made available within seconds thanks to an agent. And that's pretty much the infrastructure that I want to build.
No, I mean, I pretty much buy into the vision, first of all, that more and more everything will become tokenized. And recently, board member of Deutsche Börse mentioned that DLT is definitely the kind of technology that will permit settlement and for traditional securities as well. And the more the kind of settlement will be possible in a digital format, simultaneously we will see AI more and more entering this space, and with it comes a risk of AI breaking out, doing things, being not controlled, being biased or being manipulated, which is something that I more and more often hear, that we have to be aware that AI, that you can't control what AI does, and maybe someone else is able to manipulate the way the AI system thinks or acts.
Yeah, it's both two risk factors, right?
The AI more and more is
itself, and then also the AI being an attack vector for an exploit. Yes.
The more and more you want to have a separate kind of mechanism that ensures that the AI does not cross the border or breaks out.
100%.
Now, I think the value proposition is pretty interesting. How long have you been working with Ampli on this topic?
So we've been working on this for 1.5 years. The first half year was still spent figuring out how to use these agents productively in a product.
Yeah.
And like Ampli was actually conceived in order to build the first neobank that completely runs on agents and decentralized finance rails in the back end. But on the way of solving all of that, we realized that the underlying security stack was not really there yet. So we had to solve that for ourselves, and then we realized, well, this is actually the burning hair problem that other teams are also going to encounter, and we should help them along the way.
Yeah. Eventually, how many agents can you imagine to be available on your platform? Are we talking of 20 or 200 or
hundreds,
2,000?
Yeah, hundreds.
Hundreds.
Yeah. Eventually, like the final state that I see would be agent-to-agent coordination. It's a little bit far off right now, but the way that we're in this like parabolic growth phase, it's also difficult to say how long it will take. Like maybe it will only take a year or two until I myself or you, I would have my personal assistant agent at home that is very likely a generalized LLM that is great at translating my intentions and making a plan, but is not very good at navigating financial markets. And then you would potentially have an agent like one of our partners, Sci-Fi, who coinIX are also working with, who built this very, very dedicated agent that is solely there to navigate financial markets. And you could have a marketplace where your or my agent could come and could subcontract that agent and pay for that service. And I think that's when the growth would really go through the roof. When the human just formulates an intent and then the agents handle everything agent to agent.
Cool. I think this is a very promising story. Otherwise, we wouldn't have invested in you. But simultaneously, we are running a fund, and we might at some point in time even deploy some euro money into your kind of system, and hopefully be able to have AI agents optimize the yields within certain borders and restrictions.
Yeah, that's precisely why I'm so excited to have coinIX in our corner. I think that the whole history of the company shows that you've been very, very early to trends, and I think that's the case now as well.
Perfect. Patrick, thanks for coming over.
Thank you,
for sharing your insight, and wishing you and us all luck required to make it successful.
Thank you.